I'm probably going to call you out, but leave a comment down below if this is the exact situation that you're in right now. You've watched some of our videos before, or maybe you've gotten into game development like a while ago, and you were gonna start with a quick like 1 month to 3 month game jam project, or like a small scoped game, maybe a little tower defense or whatever. And now that you're watching this video, actually 9 months or even more has passed, and still you don't even have a Steam page out for the game yet, or an itch.io page. And your scope has increased so much by now that you're basically making a different game. Am I speaking to you right now? Because then you should really watch this video, because I want to talk a bit more about scope creep. We've been dealing with scope creep from the day that I opened Unity for the first time, really. I was already getting ideas that were inflating our scope for a game that we hadn't even started on yet. And I always say in these videos, keep your scope down, but I never fully went into depth about how do you even do that? What do you know is a good scope, is too big of a scope? And what are some things you should do when you realize that, uh-oh, my 1 month project suddenly became 5 years? What am I gonna do about it? Because if you don't keep your scope in check, if you don't have those moments where you cut back on the entire scope, your game is probably never gonna be finished, because you're gonna keep adding to your game, and then in the end you have a 5-year project that you're just done with and you don't want to work on anymore. And I don't want that. I want you to be able to actually ship your games. Now, there are 2 main parts that I want to talk about in this video. First of all is how do you get the initial scope? And then second of all, how do you prevent that scope from increasing over time in your development process? Starting, the first thing that I want you to do if you have an awesome game idea, or even if you're already working on your game but you don't have this yet, is write down your idea. I've talked about this before. We have a template in a video you can watch right there about a 1-page game design document. If you're working on a game and you haven't even written it out yet, I know you're a solo developer and you're like, oh, I have it all in my head. The problem is that your head isn't as good as you think it is, and having something that is written down physically or digitally on a paper that doesn't change over time because of how you feel or whatever is going to be critical in making sure that you have a good baseline for your game. Having that 1-page game design document where you write down, these are the core mechanics that I want to have, this is how deep I want my story to be, this is how much playtime I'm aiming for, those are critical because they are going to be your foundation for the entire development cycle. They're going to dictate, this is what I should focus on, and if I don't have these things implemented yet, there's no point in expanding my scope already. This 1-page document should really just be, what is the minimum that my game is going to need in terms of being what I want for the end goal to be? And generally these are between 3 to 5 main mechanics is what I say, and try to stick to that in the beginning at least. Don't work on anything else apart from what you've written down there. Now, also as a quick side note on that game design document, don't go into too much depth. I generally do prefer the 1-page game design documents versus writing everything out in longer detail, because your scope is going to change still. That is something that we need to accept right now. And if you spend too much time on your scope today, and then 3 months down the line, some of the things that you planned out for are simply technically impossible because you're not good enough at your engine, for example, or there's simply not enough processing power to achieve your goal, because I've seen some of the wild ideas you have, you're going to have to change things. And by having that 1-pager, you're not losing out on too much time. Whereas I also see studios who spend weeks or even months writing out a giant game design document, and then 2 months later, once they actually start developing, they just throw it all out and they never look at it, they never update it again. And once you've written down those core mechanics, that core story that you want, or anything else that you feel has to be in the scope, you're going to start making some milestones. So what I want you to do now is take the date we are today and then plan 9 months or however much in the future that you think is feasible for you. When are you going to do your first public demo? You should do a demo before you launch your game. It's going to be critical in getting both wishlists and getting feedback about your game. So that should be your main goal to build towards. Whatever date it is, put it in your calendar of, okay, in October this year, I'm going to be part of Steam Next Fest and I have to have a demo for that available by then. And then I want you to start back planning. So instead of looking at, okay, what am I going to do next month first? Look at all the different things that need to be done by the demo, and then see, okay, I'm going to need probably a bunch of items and content or whatever. I'm going to do those 2 months before the demo. And then 2 months before that, I'm gonna be finishing up these mechanics, and then 2 months before that, these are core mechanics, those should really be done. Having something like monthly-ish milestones of, this is the state that I want my game to be in, or I want to have a store page up, for example, in May, those are going to be really important because they will, along the way, keep you up with how am I doing scope-wise. If you're planning on adding a cool new feature to your game, but then you look at that planning and you see that you're already 3 months behind on that original idea, you're probably not going to be as incentivized to just add it right away, because you see that, hey, actually, I have more important stuff to do right now. If it's all in your head and you're just at runtime deciding whatever feature you're going to implement, that's a recipe to get scope creep disaster, because you're gonna keep tacking things on and never going to take a moment to step back and be like, okay, have I actually finished some of the things that I have to have in my game already? And then one more thing that I like to make at the start of development is an anti-feature list. So we do this for all our games, is we define our original scope at the start of the game, and then we also define an anti-feature list. These are the things that we know that could work in our genre, but we already commit today that we're not going to do them. So for Songs of Everjade, one of the things we put on our anti-feature list is we're not doing a shop system and an economy system. It's something that we could implement, but it would be massive scope creep, and in the end, it isn't part of the original vision we have of the game. So have some points on your anti-feature list. Some other examples could be things like multiplayer, or could be like an RPG leveling system, or could be modding support. That was a big one that we should have put on our anti-feature list for Forge Industry, because nobody cared about it in the end, but it cost us a lot of extra time. And have that as well, that whenever you're planning on like adding some cool new feature, run it through that anti-feature list and be like, okay, look, I've gone over this with old me before. We are not going to actually be implementing trains after all. And it's going to be sad in the moment, but it's just, you make a contract with yourself at the start of development to not do those things, and it's going to drastically reduce the amount of scope creep you'll experience. Now, once you start developing on your game, you are going to get that scope creep. You are going to get those ideas of, hey, actually, I've been playtesting this and this mechanic does seem to make more sense if I like added a little bit more on top of it. And this is something that you're going to have to learn with experience as well, by just making more games, that some things you should put into your scope. Sometimes scope creep is good because it will improve the game that you're making. But if you just say yes to everything, then you're, like I said, never going to be able to actually finish your game, because you're going to want to make a game like Star Citizen, but you're just a solo developer who has like a few hours of time in the weekends. It's like, it's not gonna happen. How do you prevent scope creep? The easiest way, if you can do this, is to have someone else in your development team. It's gonna be a bit harder if you're a solo developer, but having a team or having a teammate who's working on the project together with you, who can keep you sane and be like, actually, what are you saying, Marnix? Trains is a dumb idea. That's what happened with Forge Industry. I was really down to adding trains to the game, but luckily Thomas and William were both like, actually, you have no idea what you're talking about. This is going to add like months of development time. Take those trains and shove them somewhere. And it wasn't great for me. Looking back now, it was the right move, because otherwise, indeed, we would have spent a lot of extra time on a feature that probably wouldn't have been that great. But this can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes you're going to propose something really cool and all of your teammates are going to be like, whoa, yes, we should do this, because they're like hyping each other up. So for example, with Songs of Everjade, it was like, what if we add the ability to romance different characters? And of course, it sounds awesome. Everyone in the team is like, yeah, we should add romancing. And then it can be hard to like look at it a bit more objectively of, hey, look, this is a completely different game we're making then. We're not going to romance characters. Now, once again, that's something to put on the anti-feature list right up front already, if you can, so that you don't have to have that soul-crushing moment when everyone is all hype about adding some new feature, and then you have to be like, hey, actually, look, no, we can't do this right now. And then a second big thing that you should do is scope trimming. So this is something that you can time this however you want, but I would time this together with your like monthly-ish milestones, where you go through everything you've planned for your game. You look at, if you're doing some issue tracking, you look at all the different to-do lists that you have, and you look at which things do I actually not need to have the game that I want. And this is gonna sound very weird, because you're gonna be like, well, I need everything that I have here, like listed down. But in reality, you don't. You would like to have everything there, but there's a very big difference between liking to have certain features or being able to actually release your game. So this is where you're gonna go through your backlog, go through everything that you've written down of, oh, these are the features we still need to add. Maybe it's like, I need these specific extra characters, or I need this many items. And look at it objectively and be like, hey, look, do I actually need this for my game to be fun? If you feel like, okay, you're starting to miss those milestones, you're not really on schedule anymore, that's just going to be the point where you're going to have to kill your darlings. You're gonna have to look at a certain issue such as trains or whatever and just take it out and around the barn and just shoot it and never think about it again. And this sucks because you as a developer are going to be heavily invested in whatever feature you're going to be putting in your game after all. You don't just want to suddenly go and kill one of your children, but that is exactly what you need to do. For the people who are parents, don't kill your real children. I just feel like I need to say that. But it's a big part of game development, is accepting that not everything is possible. You realize this very quickly that game development doesn't go as fast or as easy as you would have thought. And getting that extra idea of, oh, I'm gonna add a jetpack or I'm gonna add a grappling hook, that takes like 3 seconds for that idea to be formed, but the actual implementation can literally take months. So you just need to build a bit of self-awareness to find out, what should I kill? But make it a regular scheduled event and not just something where you just like try to ignore that your backlog is giant and you'll never be able to go through it, but actually face the problems head on and just deal with them. And apart from that, it's just hard. I have to say that there's no 100% guaranteed way to not have scope creep ever. We still have plenty of scope creep with Songs of Everjade or with Forge Industry, and we just have to accept it to a certain degree. That's also why I say double your estimations for whatever game you originally scoped, because you're going to need some scope creep. That's fine, but don't plan on a 3-month release cycle, which is like 3 months assuming your original scope, because it is going to inflate by default. There's nothing you can do about that. Anyways, I'm also curious, what are like your worst cases of scope creep? Like, what was the game you wanted to make originally, and what's the concept that you're currently dealing with that you don't know if you'll ever be able to finish? Leave a comment down below. Apart from that, if you're new here, we're game developers, we've made our own game, we're working on the next games, and we're trying to be really open and document the entire game development process, starting a studio, and the things that we learn along the way, such as how we deal with not having giant, overly inflated scopes. So if that's something that you like, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out, because we know that you like this kind of content, and in exchange you get these videos twice a week. Also, I made a video a while back, I don't know on which side I'll put it, about scope creep. It's almost 9 months old at this point, but I think there's still some really good points in it as well, where we talk a bit more about scope creep with Forge Industry specifically and how we dealt with it. So check that out if you're interested. That's all I had to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!